what I was thinking was how men are interested in history removed from the self, but aren't very interested in their own personal histories. There's a lot of men that are resistant to things like psychotherapy, mentorship, really that self-reflective examination of my own history. I don't want to go there. But I can learn things to help me improve my life if I hear about other people's histories. All right, so let's jump in. I have a question for you, and I'm not sure if you are going to get what is implied by the question, but we can unpack it in a moment. So I guess just take it at face value to start. When was the last time you thought about the Roman Empire?
Probably on Thursday, yesterday. Excuse me, not Thursday, make that Wednesday, because I was teaching a Bible study on the Gospel of John, and inevitably that brings up the Romans.
I see. Okay. And so you smirked a little bit at the question. Do you know what I'm getting at all by asking it?
Well, I know the thing that guys are supposed to think about the Roman Empire every day. I have seen that. I'm not entirely sure it's true of me, but there you have it. I'm more of a medievalist.
Yes, right. So this is my thoughts on it are that it's not so much that men think about the Roman Empire every day, and I mean obviously the Roman Empire has carved out for itself a very important place in history. So sure, content-wise, it could be the Roman Empire. There's much to be learned from it. But you had these memes on the internet of these girlfriends and wives asking the men in their lives, "When's the last time that you've thought about the Roman Empire?" And they'll say, "I don't know. That's a strange question. Like, not very often." And then the follow-up question is, "Well, when exactly?" And they'll say, "I don't know, like a couple days ago." And the women think it's the funniest thing ever. I guess the bigger question for me is, why do men have a space in their minds for history? And you might be a bit biased as a history professor, but what do you think goes on in the male psychology in terms of the interest in history? Or even if you can't answer so broad a question, what about you personally? Why is history important?
Well, I think the broader question about men may deal with the fact that when you look at the Roman Empire, there are a lot of things about it that are admirable. Frankly, there's a lot of stuff that isn't. Mm-hmm. But the things we tend to think about are the things that are admirable. And in a lot of ways, it reflects what I think are core elements of male ideals. So you have ideas, of order. You have ideas of strength and courage and fortitude. All of these things that we associate with the Roman legions, for example, the legionaries, discipline.
Sure.
All of these kinds of things, I think, are aspirations that are cooked into us as men. And so I think that's one of the reasons why the Roman Empire is something that men find appealing and probably, return to over and over again, just as sort of the course of living, because the virtues that are distinctively or historically masculine virtues are in many ways for Westerners embodied in that empire.
Yes, and it was successful also.
Yeah. It stood for quite a while. I mean, the empire lasted for, well, depending on how you're counting it, 500 years or so in the West, and in the East, close to 1,500 years, if you're including the Byzantine Empire as a continuation of Rome, which politically it was.
Sure. Yeah. And then it became, go ahead, please go on.
Well, yeah. And for me as a historian, I like stories. I'm not, now that I'm retired, I can admit this. As a historian, I'm supposed to be, it's the analytical stuff. It's, understanding what happened in the past and all of that sort of thing.
Scholarly work.
Right. And all of that is important. I don't want to downplay that. But the
Sure.
attraction for me was the stories.
Yes,
And, you were in my class.
I
You
was.
know that the way I taught frequently was telling stories, which then became an entry point to the analysis and explanation.
Sure. Yeah, I think the whole reason I was a history major as an undergraduate was because I watched things like Sword in the Stone or Robin Hood, Disney's
Mhm,
Robin Hood as a child, and it started to just play with my imagination
mhm.
on history. And I mean, those have fantastical elements to them, but still,
Sure.
I mean, I think even in my headspace now, when I think about history, oftentimes it's more occupied with Middle Earth history than
Mm.
than actual history.
Okay. Now, C.S. Lewis made a really interesting statement at one point. He said that the mind is the organ of understanding. The
Mhm.
imagination is the mind is the organ of understanding. The imagination is the organ of meaning.
Yes. Wait, the mind. Say that one more time for me.
The mind is the organ of understanding. We use our mind to understand, to comprehend things.
Mm-hmm.
We use our imagination to find their meaning.
This is an interesting way to frame it.
We have to distinguish. One of the things that people don't do often enough is we need to distinguish between fact and meaning.
Mm-hmm.
Um, for a whole bunch of historical reasons, the idea of meaning has largely vanished in particularly academic discourse in the West.
In
Everything,
a postmodern relativistic kind of worldview.
well,
Yeah.
even in a modernist world,
Mm.
what you have is, just the facts, ma'am.
Mm-hmm.
It's all fact. But we never ask the question, what do those facts signify? What do they mean? We never go past the facts to get into this area of meaning. And that
Yeah.
is ultimately connected with a significant failure in metaphysics.
Mm-hmm.
Um, because on a metaphysical level, in the modern world, we've accepted materialism or naturalism, the idea that matter and energy is all that exists.
It's
And if that
positivism, right?
Yeah, well, positivism comes out of this.
Yeah.
Positivism is more of an epistemological system, but it's based on materialism.
Mm-hmm.
Or scientism. We can look at scientism. That's another one. That science is really the only way to find truth. You know,
Right.
in scientism, a scientific explanation, however implausible it may look, is automatically superior to any non-scientific explanation.
Yeah. What's so interesting about that for me is even going through my graduate program. You said you were making this distinction between facts and meaning. I think I've learned that even facts are, are very difficult like grasp onto as something necessarily true. I mean,
Hmm.
you go through advanced statistic courses and you can learn how someone can fudge the numbers or make them look a certain way or use a certain set of values to promote an argument or promote an agenda. And facts, I think, have a strong perceptual component to them. Psychologically, there's a perceptual
Hmm.
component to even establishing something as a fact, much less noting what is the meaning of that fact.
Right. And so people can manipulate what other people perceive as fact. But even if you
Yes.
take bedrock facts, things that,
Mm.
are not in dispute, the facts only get you to a certain distance. You've got to ask what the facts mean.
Mhm.
And in a world where matter and energy is all that exists, meaning is neither matter nor energy. So meaning
Right.
vanishes.
Yes.
And I think this is at the core of both Nietzsche's parable of the madman,
Hmm.
God is dead,
Right.
as well as Weber's idea of the disenchantment of the world.
Hmm.
Both of them are pointing ultimately to this idea of a loss of meaning, because meaning is found not in the world of, there's a thing called the fact value distinction. Meaning is not found in the world of fact, it's found in the world of values, and values are non factual. They're matters of
Yes.
opinion, they're matters of taste, they're matters of faith, but they're not fact. They don't even qualify as knowledge, they're just opinion.
Yes.
So meaning vanishes in any in any strong sense of the word.
Yeah, I'm interested in what you said earlier about the masculine ideals, the masculine virtues, and the interest in that as reflective of a larger interest in the Roman Empire. Uh, we may contrast that with what would be considered more feminine values, feminine virtues. Perhaps I'd be interested in some of which that you would list, but I would put in that category things like relationality,
Mm.
empathy, interpersonal connection, because
Cooperation rather than competition.
absolutely
Yeah,
the testosterone bolstering that or not.
sure.
Um, but what I was thinking was how men are interested in history removed from the self, but aren't very interested in their own personal histories. There's a lot of men that are resistant to things like psychotherapy,
Mhm.
mentorship, really that self reflective examination of my own history. I don't want to go there. But
Mm.
I can learn things to help me improve my life if I hear about other people's histories. You have any thought about that?
Um, yeah, in a lot of the circles I travel in, that's really not the case. A lot of
Mm-hmm.
the groups that I have been in almost put, I think, at times too much emphasis on personal history
Mm,
and things like that. But I think it's probably good as a good observation as a generalization.
yes.
And
And
I
do you
think,
you surround yourself generally with? I mean, in Christian circles, you surround yourself with Christian men typically.
right. Yeah.
That might say something about
Mm.
the difference between the two, right?
Yeah. So I'm with I meet with a bunch of guys now over Zoom. We used to do this live as sort of a small group support group kind of thing that was affiliated with the New Canaan Society, and they are all about this kind of thing.
Sure.
So I see it in places like that at the very least. But I think the reason is that for a lot of guys, their sense is okay. This is where I am. Revisiting the past is not gonna fix things. What do I do now? How do I
Mhm.
move forward from here?
It's very practical, strategic.
Right,
Yeah,
right.
it's not emotive.
Right. I think and again that ties in with the Roman Empire. Discipline, self-sacrifice, all of these kinds of things um, are. I I'm not sure how much of it is hardwired, but I suspect that there's a certain amount of that is that is connected to male psychology.
Yeah.
So I don't need to go into the past. Go dealing with childhood trauma. Okay, yeah, maybe there might be some value to that if it's affecting my life now, but I don't see how it is. So let's just move on. What's the next thing that I do? How do I get to the next step?
Yeah, it's not as obvious. I mean, starting to
Right.
play around with the ideas like the
Yeah.
unconscious. I mean, even acknowledging that the unconscious exists, if you take that position, it can be pretty jarring
Mhm.
to think that there are things about myself that I'm not in control over, that I'm unaware of.
Yeah.
I think
Now,
also,
now
go ahead,
understand,
please.
I need to say this. I know what you do for a living.
Hmm.
So what I'm saying is how I think a lot of guys sort of intuitively react to these kinds of things. I'm not saying it's right. Like I
Yeah,
said,
yeah, yeah, sure.
I'm in with this offshoot of NCS, New Canaan Society. I'm in this offshoot of that, where this is one of the things that it, frankly, in my mind, may come up a little bit more often than it should, but it still has its value. It's something that we should be aware of.
Sure. I mean, I also think you said some of this is hardwired. To what extent, you don't know how much of it is. I think that's fair. I think there are also environmental influences as well. I mean,
Sure.
the masculine construct, the stiff upper lip, the avoidance of the emotional life, which one's history is filled with. It's
Mm.
the emotional life, and oftentimes in Western culture and in American Western culture, we go through experiences of being hurt and wounded, and then we receive messages about that, which largely consist of shoving it down, right? Not examining it. And I mean, even myself, even with what I do, I'm not immune to that myself. I think it's pervasive, the cultural influences on what it means to be a man.
Sure. But I think that if you look cross cultures, sure,
Hmm.
there are differences in what masculinity looks like. But many of the same things that historically in the West have been considered masculine virtues actually transcend cultures.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
And the reason for that, I suspect, if you're going to look at it on a purely pragmatic level, is that men were the protectors of society.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and there are a whole lot of physiological reasons for that. You know, superior strength overall, especially upper body strength.
Yeah.
You know, a whole host of things. Women have incredible strengths in other areas, which
Mm-hmm.
is why women really can't compete with biological men, but that's a whole different issue. But because of that, the men end up being, you know, the most logical people to mount a defense in a world without firearms.
Mm.
Further, women are the ones who bear children. Therefore, the women need to be protected if the next generation is going to be here, if our family line or our civilization is going to survive. The
They're in a
men are,
vulnerable
in a
place.
sense, expendable in a way that the women aren't.
Yeah, and I would argue too that the women are typically, I mean, if they're bearing children, they're by nature in a vulnerable position.
Right.
So they need something other than themselves to do the protection, to have the job of protection.
Right. Yeah. The example I used to use is, imagine you're back in the Stone Age. Who do you want hunting the woolly mammoth? The guy or the woman who's 8 months pregnant?
Right. Or holding
with a stone-tipped spear.
Or holding the toddler.
Yeah.
And pregnant.
Right.
Yeah.
And yeah. So that, you know, that's really I think that there are historical, anthropological, but also physiological reasons why these things are in place.
Yeah. Yeah. That's interesting.